This week on The Record, Cori Bush falls to Wesley Bell, why the White House was responding to Bush's defeat, how Bell aims to take on the new job should he win in November. And in a Senate slugfest, it's a debate over debates. Josh Hawley and Lucas Kunce challenging each other ahead of the Missouri State Fair. Now that the dust has settled from a bruising primary season, political analyst Anita Mannion previews the big election to come in November. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. St. Louis voters fired Cori Bush, sending her home after 2 terms in Congress this week. Bush, who rose to prominence protesting police abuse of power, took her activism to the steps of the U.S. Capitol. She drew national attention to a surge in homelessness and eviction during the pandemic. She was arrested protesting abortion bans and won progressive plaudits in some corners for vocally calling for Israel to stand down on the very day Hamas attacked. She took the stage Tuesday night and voiced defiance in her defeat.
But all they did was radicalize me, and so now they need to be afraid. See, now they about to see this other Cori, this other side, because let me say this. I just grew up a whole lot more over the last few weeks. Just grew up a whole different way. And so what they are about to get, AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down.
President Biden's White House condemning Bush's rhetoric there, calling that language divisive and inflammatory.
You did look a little uncomfortable on stage that night, Tuesday night. Do you agree with President Biden that that kind of rhetoric was inappropriate?
Well, I think that the larger question is we should be asking questions about the outside influence of outside money in local races. We know that as this congressional election season started, that AIPAC declared war on certain members of Congress, saying that they were going to put $100 million in their races to defeat them. They started with Jamal Bowman, they continued with Cori Bush, and they have other members in their craw. But these 5 or 6 members of Congress haven't been the only congressional members who have been critical of Israel and the war currently going on there. And why aren't they targeting them? And, this is a broader conversation that we have to have. Is the Democratic Party okay with a large organization, a large super PAC pushing out its members? And I think the answer would be no.
St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell defeated her on Tuesday in one of the most closely watched primary races in the nation. The Democratic nominee for the 1st Congressional District in Missouri joins us now. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
You called this a nasty race. I was probably putting it mildly. In your acceptance speech, you indicated perhaps you had seen some of this noise online. A lot of that noise came from young liberal progressives, many of whom smeared you as a, quote, plant. They called you a puppet, someone who they felt could not speak for himself on big issues like abortion because they thought that pro-Jewish groups controlled you with their money. Do you feel that any of your critics at any time in this race crossed a line from just scrutinizing outside money, campaign finance, into racism or anti-Semitism?
There were things that were said that absolutely crossed the line. And, I'm from Missouri. I'm an African-American man, and Missouri's had its issues of racism and things of that nature in our history. And I've never been called anything like some of the things that I was called during the election.
Could you have won this race without support from AIPAC?
I believe we would have won this election regardless. I think at the end of the day, when I talked to voters heard every message from both candidates. They saw the way we were campaigning, and we were talking about my record and what we wanted to do, and they heard the Congresswoman's divisiveness and her campaign, which was basically about division. And I'll just say this, most folks, they appreciated the fact that we shared, instead of division, a vision for the St. Louis region and moving this region forward.
You jumping into this race, though, did force some uncomfortable conversations. This is our first time talking to you since that private phone call was leaked that we published.
Yeah.
In that call, you did say a couple things like, be really tough to run every 2 years. You promised, you vowed you wouldn't run against her in that phone call. I understand things changed. I want to ask you a different question, though, because
But you brought it up, though. So
I did bring it up,
address
but I want
do-
to ask you this question because I'm also aware of some older black men in the community who are excited to see you run for the Senate. Some even donated to your Senate campaign, and then they were frustrated when you ran against her instead, and they felt sort of left in the lurch. Both of you and Cori Bush on the nights of the election mentioned some of the tension and the friction left over in the district. How do you speak to those people who might have wanted you in the Senate but voted for her for Congress?
Well, first and foremost, the voters spoke. I'm very proud of the victory. It was a resounding victory in St. Louis County. I think we won every township except maybe 2. Voters wanted a message, they wanted a vision for this region, and that's exactly what we campaigned on. Now, you brought up the phone call. That was secretly recorded by the Congresswoman, and
Which is legal.
Which is
in
legal,
Missouri.
but who does that? Let's be honest. Like, do you do that with your friends?
I
know
don't.
a
I
lot
also
of-
don't suspect my friends are trying
Exactly.
to take my job.
Well, either way, though, but I do. I know a lot of elected officials who are very reluctant to want to speak to the Congresswoman because they're afraid that they might be recorded. And at the end of the day, at that time, as you know, when that call was made in June, I was running for the Senate, so I was not intending to run for that office. And because voters in my district and around the state and around the country, the calls were coming for me to get into that race because we weren't having effective representation, and so I changed my mind. We made our case to voters. We made our case on why we would be the more effective candidate. We made the case on the relationship that we have with community, with criminal justice reform, when we're talking about making this a safer place. And I have those relationships with law enforcement to be able to do that. And when the Dobbs decision came down, my office was on day one announced that we would not be prosecuting those cases. And so I think my positions have been clear for 10 years now as a Ferguson City Councilman, as well as the county prosecutor, and voters agreed with that.
We learned this year that a hyper-conservative think tank behind Project 2025 has laid plans to revive the Comstock Act of 1873. The Department of Justice right now considers that sort of a outdated chastity law that they don't enforce, but it still is on the books, and it treats contraceptives as obscene and illicit, makes it a federal offense to mail abortion pills across state lines. Congresswoman Cori Bush in the summer of this year introduced a bill to repeal the Comstock Act. Would you sponsor or author a bill like that?
I do not believe the government should have any hand in what a woman, or in this case, a man, can do with respect to birth control, with respect to reproductive rights. And so absolutely, I would be for championing that bill as well.
To repeal.
To repeal, I should say. But there's a lot of things that we need to address, and obviously that's one of them. And I've been very clear on where I stand with respect to reproductive rights. And I believe that means the right to an abortion, but also the right to birth control and things of that nature.
There's another big piece of legislation that is stuck in Congress. You would be inheriting this big headache, but it's something that has affected a lot of the lives in North County. The Radioactive Exposure Compensation Act, the fallout from Coldwater Creek and the atomic bomb and all the building there. I don't know what the issue is, but it seems like every time the House or the Senate gets some bill together, halfway puzzled together, it falls apart in conference committee. Some of this is like inside baseball and how the sausage is made in Congress. But what can you do differently that can bring compensation home to victims who were harmed by their own government?
I think the RECA Act is a good piece of legislation. It has not passed in the House as of yet. You know, inside baseball, there's some Congress folks who don't work as well with their caucus. We're going to work with our caucus. I think that we can get that legislation passed. I think it needs to be passed.
Are you comfortable with the price tag? Because that seems to be the sticking point.
Listen, are you comfortable with folks who have gotten cancer, who are searching for answers to what we all can see is a problem. And so I think that that's something that we need to address. We need to make certain that folks are compensated, and we need to make sure it's cleaned up.
All right, he's the Democratic nominee running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. We appreciate your access and sitting down to answer some tough questions during and after, and hopefully
always. That's the
moving forward.
job.
All right.
That's the job.
Thanks for your time. We have an expanded version of our conversation up on KSDK.com. You can also send us a tip or leave a note if you text RECORD to 314-425-5355. A primary race already heating up. Will Josh Hawley debate Lucas Kunce in person? We check in with their campaigns next. We have a Senate showdown on our hands. Democrat Lucas Kunce will face Republican Senator Josh Hawley in November. Within minutes of Kunce winning the Democratic nomination Tuesday night, Hawley publicly challenged him to a debate in person, one-on-one, at the Missouri State Fair Thursday with no moderators. Kunce agreed to debate if Hawley would agree to televise them with moderators. KSDK and our broadcast partners across the state quickly offered to moderate that event and broadcast it in prime time. Kunce agreed, but Hawley refused to agree to moderators who could keep the debate on topic and on time.
Let's get up there, let's answer the hard questions for Missourians so everyone in Missouri can hear and see what's going on. He don't want to do that because he don't want to answer questions like, why he robbed Missourians of $250,000 to cover legal fees for his violations of transparency laws when he was Attorney General. He doesn't want to answer the hard questions about why he refuses to protect in vitro fertilization and contraception. He doesn't want to answer questions about why he brings $0 back to this state in marked money every single year, while our former Republican, Roy Blunt, brought $350 million a year back to the state. Like, these are hard questions the man should have to answer, along with all the other ones that Missourians want to know.
Meanwhile, Senator Hawley rallied voters in Chesterfield Thursday night and tried to turn the tables on Kunce, but he would not accept the televised debate we had offered him, refusing a debate where moderators could keep topics and time on track. Why won't you agree to that?
Well, why won't he agree to a Lincoln Douglas debate that has already been sponsored by the Missouri Farm Bureau and has people ready to televise it? Your old employer, Nick Starr, who said that they will stream it statewide, they will broadcast it on the stations, and you can come too, Mark. But here's the deal. Lucas Kunce is trying to hide behind, it's any excuse not to do that debate. As soon as I offered it, he said, no, let's do a debate on some other channel. Then it was, there need to be multiple moderators. He wants you to hold his hand and put his makeup on and ask his questions. Why can't he just answer questions from farmers?
No TV station is just going to give over an hour of prime time to politicians with no one to keep time and to keep it fair. So would you be open to that?
Well, you're saying that you don't think the Farm Bureau is fair?
No, I'm saying that if TV stations are going to come and give it an hour of airtime, there needs to be some agents of those.
Apparently you haven't talked to your fellow TV stations, because Nick Starr said that they will stream it statewide, they will air it on their broadcasts.
Are you declining our offer?
I'm not declining anybody's offer. I've said that I will do this debate that I have committed to on Thursday, sponsored by the Farm Bureau, open to everybody. We're ready to go. We've got the format set out. I just announced it tonight. So let's do that. And then after that, let's talk about it.
And to be clear, the Farm Bureau has endorsed Josh Hawley. All right, we have more analysis on the election night with Anita Mannion coming up next. Those big primary results are in. Our political analyst and expert Anita Mannion is here to help us go over them. This is our big map. We love the map. Okay, what does this result tell us about the direction of the Missouri Republican Party?
Yeah, overall, Mike Parson had a good night. He had 3 appointees running for office that he endorsed, and all 3 won. And Mike Kehoe is one of them. So this sort of solidifies his legacy, and it says maybe there is a desire for continuity and more establishment politics. But then you look a little closer, and you see that these two combined that were more the kind of MAGA wing of the party got over 50% of the vote. And so that tells you that maybe this really is still the party of Trump here in Missouri. But how will that play in a general election? So Kehoe might be a better mainstream candidate for the general election.
And Trump technically endorsed all 3, sort of sidestepped it a little bit. But, most people who follow this closely know that these two had more closely aligned with most of Trump's policies, or at least tried to mimic them. Jay Ashcroft, though, I mean, really, he was leading in most of the polls and then just slipped to 3rd place. How did the bottom fall out for him?
These two, this was one of the more surprising results for me from Tuesday. Ashcroft came into this with the wind at his back. He had the name recognition, experience running statewide, and really underperformed. Where Eigel, out-MAGA'd Ashcroft and had a brand that, of being insurgent in the state legislature that I think people really liked.
All right, it's Mike Kehoe versus Crystal Quaid. Let's take a look at that. We're going to punch that up now. Some of the counties apparently haven't fully reported their results through to the AP here, so that's why you're seeing that. We'll turn the heat map on and see if that does much for us. Now let's keep it solid colors, easier to follow that way. But a pretty resounding victory here. Mike Hamra kind of took the, I guess there are some advisors who think he could have done more to really introduce himself to voters at the county level, where Democratic parties usually make up their minds. He was kind of an unknown.
I think that's right. And, maybe tapping more into his personal story. But ultimately, in a primary where you have 30% turnout, Crystal Quaid, although she's maybe not known to voters all across the state, she is known to the type of people who vote in primary elections. And so she had an advantage there. Plus, she's run for office before. She knew how to do it. And while Democrats haven't won statewide office since 2018 and haven't won a governor's race since 2012 in Missouri, Crystal Quaid feels like they have a chance this year, partially because, at the top of the ticket, there might be some energy around Kamala Harris, and with having abortion likely on the ballot in November, she thinks that's to her benefit.
If we look at this total vote count, 377,000 Democrats cast a ballot in the governor's race. We go back to the Republican side, twice that number.
Yeah.
So if the people are just picking a party they want to, now that you could say there were more exciting statewide races for the Republicans, maybe that kind of tilted the scales a little bit, but almost 2-1, she's got an uphill battle.
Absolutely does, yeah.
All right, let's look down here. Let's see, let's pick one. Let's go to the 3rd Congressional District. This was another test of Donald Trump's endorsement power, but you see a clear regional divide between Bob Onder and Kurt Schaefer. Ultimately, too many votes here in St. Charles County. 21,000 votes there, just in that county alone for Bob Onder. So you go back to the total of it, and I mean, what do you see here? Kurt Schaefer thought he had a shot.
Well, he did, but this was the only race we had where Trump only endorsed one person. In some of the other races, he endorsed 2 or 3, and Bob Onder got that singular endorsement. I think it really helped him, and plus his experience in St. Charles County. He's a known commodity. There's a lot of voters there, and that all put him over the top.
Yeah, and you saw both of these gentlemen on this program explaining their positions just last week. Before we wind this down, let's take a quick look at this Senate matchup. Lucas Coons, I want to try to evaluate his strength, and what we're going to do is turn the heat map on here. So you see the darker the shade, the more vote share, 74.6% there, 74.8%. Those are typically blue counties, but you go here, you see he's doing really well in some of the more rural areas too. So what does this say about how his challenge with Josh Hawley could go? What's his path to victory?
Yeah, that was true when he ran against Cori Bush Valentine in the primaries as well. He did a lot better in the rural areas. And I think the Democrats like him as a candidate because he does have military experience. He does speak to rural voters. But again, he's going to have an uphill battle in this election as well.
Maybe there'll be a debate. We don't know.
That would be wonderful. Maybe more than one.
A couple debates, 2, 3, 4. Let them debate. All right, Anita Mannion, our political analyst and expert. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
We check the record when we come back. Before we go, let's check the record. Vice President Kamala Harris, tapping Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate this week, offered us yet another echo of 1968. It's a Minnesota man on the presidential ticket now, and it was that way then too. Oh, and there's an RFK running this year. And there's a third-party candidate who might play spoiler like there was back then. Also, the DNC is in Chicago. Protesters are railing against foreign wars. Oh, and a leading candidate was shot in a summer campaign stop. A lot of comparisons to 1968. So let's check the record. It was 56 years ago, next month, that Richard Nixon brought his presidential campaign here through St. Louis. Our KSTK archives show the former vice president who lost in 1960 and then lost again in a race for California governor in 62. He was in desperate need of momentum. He found that spark under the newly raised arch from a large crowd who welcomed him downtown. An overflow crowd of 4,000 people packing Kiel Auditorium to capacity levels. More cheers greeting Nixon and his wife on a visit then across the river to Illinois. The GOP candidate was well received during both visits. His presidency would ultimately be remembered for that scandal that resulted in him becoming the only president to voluntarily leave office. And oh, by the way, this week marks 50 years since Richard Nixon made that historic decision. It was August 8, 1974, when Nixon addressed the country from the Oval Office on national TV, announcing he would resign the presidency following that Watergate scandal. A little walk down memory lane there for you. That's all of our time this week. Thanks for joining us. We hope you'll be right back here next week at our normal time at 11 o'clock at night. Until then, we're off the record.